Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Garrett McLaughlin. As you know, in today's exercise of the week video, what I want to run through today is what's called forearm hip extension. Very similar to what people call donkey kicks, but you know a lot of the names that I use for exercises a little bit more specific than these created names that we've gone to over the years. So forearm hip extension is pretty much just training how do I stabilize the core properly so I'm not arching into the lower back while extending the hip. Too many people, when they're performing a hip extension type movement on all fours and quadruped in those positions, are holding, again, setting up in a good position, but you can see that arching into the lower back. From a running standpoint, we want to try to maintain stability throughout the core, rib cage, spine, pelvis as much as possible. As we isolate hip extension, that's our big push off where the power comes from, where we push off and propel the body forward. So the forearm hip extension combines proper breathing, core stabilization, and then isolating hip extension, which you'll notice will be a lot more limited than just aimlessly extending the leg without locking in the core first. So a couple recommendations on performing this exercise: getting down here to the forearms, okay? The tendency a lot of times when we're up here is to get into a greater degree of extension or arching at the lower back. But if we're down here, it usually locks us in a better position where we're not arching through the back as much, right? So we're already setting ourselves up better to not cheat and compensate as we perform the hip extension. And then from here, right, if we think of elbows under shoulders, knees under hips, getting pretty close to that position, what I'm going to do first is to take a nice deep breath. Exhale. I'm trying to get in a position where I can exhale, allow my rib cage to come down. As I get into that position, I'm going to lightly engage the abs. This helps set up the core or this canister in more of a neutral position that I can then, again, prevent arching and extend the hip from, right? It's a good, strong and stable foundation to extend the hip. So from here, exhale, rib cage down, lightly squeeze the abs. Then all I'm going to do from here is, while engaging the core, extend through the hip. And I like to stay on the same side just so we're not alternating to start. You can alternate as you get better at this, but just comfortably going through hip extension. What I find with a lot of people, when you're limited in hip extension, you go to push off. As soon as that joint hits its end range of motion, the tendency to get more range of motion is the pelvis to continue to tip. Again, we want the pelvis to anterior tilt to some degree, but the pelvis will tilt excessively. The back will start to arch, and then we end up in more of this really arched lower back position. So we need to use stability and control through the core. Breathing, controlling the spine, the rib cage, and the pelvis to isolate the hip. So simple exercise, don't need to do a lot of repetitions, a lot of weight, just retraining that movement pattern on how to isolate the hip while not allowing the lower back to move. Breathing, rib cage down, squeeze the core, and then going through your repetitions. And if you're limited in hip extension, maybe coupling this with some hip flexor and quad flexibility. But a very good tip for a lot of people to learn how to extend and use the hip without compensating and always arching into the back. A lot of people that I see with lower back issues have issues isolating the hip without the back moving. So this helps teach just that foundational skill of core stability, breathing, isolated hip extension. Again, complete anywhere. Again, I wouldn't use this necessarily as a strengthening exercise. This is more of a teaching tool, how to get all these pieces to fit together. So anywhere from 1 to 2 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions should usually suffice. If you have any questions about this forearm hip extension exercise, feel free to leave some comments below, and I hope you enjoyed the video today. Thank you.